The UFC's run of 7 straight events outside of the Apex is going to come to an end on August 2nd, and we're really free-falling, going from the really strong Abu Dhabi card to now an Apex event headlined by Tatsuro Taira taking on Amir Albazi. But I'm still here, going to be doing my prediction video. We're breaking down every single matchup, main card and the prelims, picking the winner and how I think they get it done. And who knows, sometimes like these, lower quality, lower levels of competition, sometimes these events end up being really solid. You get a ton of finishes. I will still be tuning in. If you're watching this video, I'm assuming that you are also. Timestamps will be in the description if you guys want to jump around. But let's just dive right into it here. And we're going to be starting off with Piera Rodriguez taking on Ketlen Souza. For Rodriguez here, she's actually coming off a pretty impressive win against someone who I was very high on in Josephine Knudsen. Really just dominated that fight in the grappling department. And that's really been how she's been having some success in the UFC. 51% takedown accuracy, averages 4.1 takedowns per 15 minutes. She has a 3-2 UFC record, but one of those losses was a DQ in a fight that she was doing very well in and likely would have been on her way to winning. On the other side here with Souza, she has a 2-2 UFC record, but definitely could be on a 3-fight win streak. She had a split decision loss to Angela Hill, a fight that I think a lot of people thought she won. Now, for Angela Hill, she's kind of been like the queen of losing, like very competitive, close split decisions. So she finally got one to go her way, but it might have been one of the ones that she actually shouldn't have gotten. And so Souza's a very good striker. She throws powerful looping punches, works the body pretty well, does have some questionable takedown defense, was taken down 2 times by Angela Hill, and then also was taken down twice by Marnik Mann in, 2 of her 4 UFC fights here. At strawweight, the margins in each round are just very, very small because you don't have as many knockdowns, you don't have as many huge shots that make a clear, visible impact. And so I typically like to lean towards the person that has the grappling upside, because if you're going, shot for shot on the feet, and then someone's able to land a takedown, get a few minutes of control time, land at least a few decent shots on the ground, typically that is enough to kind of swing the judges. And so I think that's where Rodriguez is kind of going to get an edge here. I do think on the feet, Souza's very solid. She does hit decently hard, so maybe she's not the perfect example of this because she could potentially land a knockdown on the feet. But I do think the grappling of Rodriguez is going to, help her win this matchup. So I'm going to go with Piera Rodriguez by decision. Up next, we're going to have Azamat Bekoev taking on, apologies in advance for the pronunciation, Yousri Belgaroui. That might be right, might be wrong. For Bekoev here, he's a pretty interesting middleweight prospect, very well-rounded, hits hard on the feet, very solid striker, also a very good grappler. He has 20 pro wins, 8 of those by knockout, 8 of them by submission, 4 by decision, 29 years old, so still some room to kind of grow, improve, move up in this weight class. And he has a lot of experience for only being 29, 23 pro fights. That is a lot of fights under his belt. This was supposed to be Torres Finney. Torres Finney ended up having to pull out. So we have Belgaroui making his UFC debut. He's a pretty high-level kickboxer, competed in Glory, fought a few times for the belt in that promotion. He is a huge middleweight, 6'5", with a 79-inch reach. He went 1-1 on the Contender Series. In his win, he did beat a pretty low-level opponent. The guy's record wasn't terrible, but his strength of schedule was just atrocious. I don't think he had fought more than one dude with a winning record. And that fight, it was a pretty clear win for him, but it was very clunky. He landed a lot of eye pokes, and then he found a finish later in the 3rd round. He does have a good jab. Obviously, he's going to use that frame. Fights pretty well from range. I just don't really trust his grappling in this matchup. In his first Dana White Contender Series fight, he was out-grappled by Marco Tulio. Even in the second fight, he's too willing to just be in the clinch. He was giving his back to his opponent, Iwasaki, and that's just not going to work against Bekoev here. I think he's going to be able to hold his own on the feet, and then I think he pulls away with the grappling. So I'm actually going to go with Azamat Bekoev round 1 submission. We're going to go all the way down to flyweight, where we have Felipe Bunes taking on Rafael Estevam. These are 2 grapplers who both have somewhat questionable cardio so far in their UFC runs. Estevam here is an undefeated 13-0 prospect. He is 2-0 in the UFC with wins against Charles Johnson and Jesus Aguilar. In those 2 UFC fights, he has landed a combined 14 total takedowns, but we've seen him fade in those matchups. Like I mentioned, he lost round 3 in both of those fights. So super grappling heavy, was able to bank the first couple of rounds, and then when we got to round 3, he had faded, but he had done enough, was able to not get finished. And he's also kind of struggled to just land real damage against UFC caliber opponents. He did get a finish on the ground in the Contender Series, but he's only landed 29 total significant strikes in his first 2 UFC fights, like under 30 total over 2 matchups that went the distance. That is tough. For Bunes here, he is 1-1 in the UFC. Also a grappler, but more of like a opportunistic submission threat. 9 of his 14 wins are by submission. He actually has a lot of like really solid experience pre-UFC. So he's a 14-7 record, which is not great, but like he fought some pretty solid dudes. I want to say he fought in ACA, like some dudes I'm not going to pretend like I'm super familiar with, but like very solid records, also fighting in a decent promotion. So even though their records do seem pretty far apart, I don't think this is going to be like a complete wash here for Estevam. I do think Estevam probably has the edge, though, in this matchup. He's not going to be super fan-friendly, but his grappling's effective. I do trust him to be able to rack up some of that control time. I think we could get in a situation where Bunes is kind of trying to play the jiu-jitsu game and allowing Estevam to just rack up that control, bank a couple of rounds. And then I also just don't trust the cardio on the other side for Bunes to be able to come back and, potentially win like the second half of the second, the third round, or find a late finish. So I think Estevam is going to rack up control time, stifle the submission offense, and I think he picks up a decision win. Then we're supposed to get Austin Bashi on this card. We still might. At the time that I'm recording this, he doesn't have an opponent, so obviously can't break down this matchup. Was supposed to fight Francis Marshall. Thought that was a really fun matchup, but hopefully he gets on this card, but unfortunately won't have the breakdown for it. Then we're going to have Nick Klein taking on Andrey Pulyaev. I don't really know if either of these dudes are going to end up sticking in the UFC. Klein is 6-2, so pretty inexperienced, 0-1 in the UFC so far. He's very good grappler, like dangerous submission skills, but very limited on the feet. He's been knocked out in both of his losses. Also just faced like a very weak strength of schedule outside the UFC. For Pulyaev, he has a 9-3 record, 0-1 in the UFC, had a pretty bad debut against Christian Leroy Duncan, where like Duncan was in control the entire time, but never really pushed the pace, and then Pulyaev was just like unable to really do anything. He's primarily a striker, pretty big frame for the weight class, 6'4" with a 78.5-inch reach, solid kicks, but also just a little bit too susceptible of like accepting the clinch, letting guys kind of close the distance on him, which can be somewhat controversial in this matchup here against Nick Klein, who is going to want to, get in the clinch, work his grappling. To be totally honest, I don't trust either of these guys. I think I slightly prefer the striking ability of Pulyaev because even though I don't like how he lets guys kind of hold him, clinch him, he did stuff all of Christian Leroy Duncan's takedowns. And so on the feet, it's where the fight's going to start. I'm going to favor him slightly here. I'll go Pulyaev by decision, but tough to feel fully confident in either of these dudes. Then we're going to have a fight between Rodolfo Vieira and Tresean Gore. Vieira is a super accomplished jiu-jitsu grappler. He's a 4-time BJJ world champion. Solid success so far in the UFC, 5-3 record. All 5 of those wins are by submission. Of his 10 pro wins, 9 are by sub, only 1 is by knockout. He's fine on the feet. Like, it's not a total liability, but it's really just a means to set up his grappling. In his last 2 losses, we've seen him just be completely unable to land the takedowns. 1 for 31 on takedown attempts. I believe that was against Andrey Petrosky and then Chris Curtis. I think Chris Curtis stuffed all 20 takedown attempts, which is kind of crazy. For Tresean Gore here, he is 5-3 as a pro, 2-3 in the UFC. Coming into the UFC, like off The Ultimate Fighter, he was kind of viewed and pushed as like this dangerous, powerful puncher. But so far in the UFC, his 2 wins are actually by guillotine, and he does have a nasty guillotine. If you look at the one he landed on Josh Frem, it literally looked like he was going to pop the dude's head off. And that is, somewhat of a concerning thing for Vieira, where if he's going to be trying to shoot takedowns, work the grappling, that you do have to be careful of that with Tresean Gore. But outside of that, I don't really know how you trust him here. Like, maybe he's more dangerous on the feet. I feel like Tresean Gore is an example of someone where he would have been better off just getting more regional experience before he got into the UFC. Because I want to say he's like 31 years old now, had a decent layoff in like the 22 to 23 time frame, I believe. And at this point, it's like, yeah, he's in the age where he probably should be in the UFC, but I just don't know if he's ever going to get to a solid, stable place in the company. So I am going to pick Vieira here. Don't really trust Tresean Gore to stuff all the takedowns like we saw Petrosky and Chris Curtis do, who I just think are better defensive wrestlers. And so Rodolfo Vieira, I think he gets it done in the second round. I'll go round 2 submission win. Then we're going to drop a few weight classes here with Rinya Nakamura taking on Nathan Fletcher. Nakamura, we actually go from one credentialed jiu-jitsu player to a very credentialed wrestler. Nakamura was the 2017 U23 world champion in wrestling. He has a 9-1 pro record, 3-1 in the UFC. He is coming off one of the most frustrating performances that I can think of in recent memory. He lost a fight 30-27 to Muin Gafurov. He was a minus 600 favorite. So the man, like I said, this, super credentialed wrestler, that's how he had dominated his first couple of UFC fights. He had gone 7 for 7 on takedown attempts in his first 3 UFC matchups. He shot one singular time against Gafurov and just accepted getting outstruck on the feet. It was mind-numbing to watch, but that's what he did. I guess it's something we have to worry about here in this matchup where he just might fight completely suboptimally. On the other side with Fletcher, he is also primarily a grappler, but a little bit more of a submission threat, whereas Nakamura is these explosive takedowns, going to land a lot of damage on the ground, and also actually does have some pop on the feet. But Fletcher here, 9-2, 1-1 in the UFC, could potentially be 2-0, had a split decision against Kalen Loughran. I'm not sure if I mentioned this, but 7 of his 9 wins have come by submission. I do think there are just some concerns about his takedown defense. Kalen Loughran was able to take him down 6 times. On the other side, Fletcher only went 1 for 7 on his own takedown attempts. And I just think there's going to be an extreme physicality difference between these two. I think Nakamura is the way better athlete. I think he's way more explosive, way more powerful. And so I think he could potentially hurt Fletcher on the feet. That's kind of what we saw in his road to the UFC fights, where he is very dangerous if he's just going to wing on the feet, but he also, can take you down, land a lot of ground and pound. I do think Fletcher is going to be good enough to avoid a finish, but I do think Nakamura is going to win this fight, and I'm going to pick him by decision. This matchup is definitely one of the fights I am most excited about. We have Danny Silva taking on Kevin Vallejos. For Vallejos here, he is, in my opinion, the top featherweight prospect in terms of dudes that are outside the rankings. He's a 15-1 record. His only loss came to John Silva, and I believe that's the only win on John Silva's record that actually came by decision. So he just goes in there, nukes everyone else. Not against Vallejos here. He's only 23 years old, so still very green, but also has a lot of experience. 16 pro fights at 23 years old. 11 of those have ended by knockout, 2 by submission. He is super dangerous boxing, hits very hard, had a round 1 knockout in his UFC debut. On the other side here with Silva, he's also a very fun fighter, fights at a high pace. In his 3 fights under the UFC umbrella, so 2 UFC fights, 1 on the Contender Series, he's averaging 7.36 significant strikes per minute, can mix in the grappling, has landed 7 takedowns in those 3 fights, but he also takes a lot of damage. He's absorbing almost 8 significant strikes per minute. He's absorbing more than he is delivering. And then both of his UFC wins have come by split decision. So he's getting into these kind of competitive dog fights, and he is pulling them out, but he's not really creating these significant margins in these fights. And so I do think Silva is just too hittable. I am a believer here in Vallejos. I think he's too powerful, and I'm going to pick him by round 2 knockout. Then we're going to go up to 170, where we have Neil Magny taking on Elizeu Zaleski dos Santos. Neil Magny is coming off of back-to-back round 1 knockout losses, but against really strong competition, Carlos Prates and Michael Morales. He's really been able to beat these non-top 10 welterweights. He's been considered the gatekeeper of the weight class, and so far it's kind of held up, where these guys that beat him do go on, have a decent amount of success. In his last 8 fights, the losses have come against Carlos Prates, Michael Morales, Ian Gary, Gilbert Burns, and Shavkat Rakhmonov. The wins have come against Mike Malott, Phil Rowe, and then Daniel Rodriguez. So, I guess D-Rod now breaking into the top 15, but he stopped Malott from getting in the top 15. Same thing with Phil Rowe. And he's going to come into this fight like he always does. He's going to want to make it grimy, get into the clinch, try to work his wrestling, just kind of wear you out on the cage. He's not going to be super explosive on the feet, not going to have anything crazy for you on the ground, but it really is just like a grinded out fight. It's not going to be super fun for the fans, but if he gets his way, it can be effective in certain matchups like we've seen. I think the Phil Rowe is kind of like a good example of that, but I guess he has shown like some later finishing upside against Malat and Daniel Rodriguez, getting like the round 3 finishes. For Zaleski here, he's had mixed results as of late. 2-2-1 record since 2023. He's been very competitive against like fringe top 15 competition. This is a pretty quick turnaround for him here. He was knocked out in March by Chidi and Njokuani. We just saw Chidi fight, and he was the guy who won by knockout. But like for this specific matchup, I don't feel like Magny's going to be the guy who's like really testing the chin. So not overly concerned about that. He's primarily a striker, but hasn't really found the finishes by knockout as of late. Only 1 knockout in the last 7 years. He did hurt Rinat Fakhretdinov with like a front kick to the body, which ended up leading to a draw in a fight that he was down 2-0 in. I just think comparing these two, Neil Magny creates very like limited margins in his fights. This is something I've mentioned a few times already in this video, but he doesn't pull away in rounds, right? Like if he's doing this clinch heavy, wrestle heavy attack, but he's not landing these huge shots, he's not, really threatening with anything, he can win those rounds, but like you absorb 1 or 2 big shots, he gets clipped a little bit, and all of a sudden that round's just swinging the other way. And I think that's what I'm worried about here in this matchup, where Zaleski's shown enough grit in some of these fights that I don't think he's going to let Neil Magny just like completely pin him against the cage. And I do think he's going to land the bigger, more impactful shots. And I think that's going to help him win a decision. I do think he could finish Neil Magny, but aside from like just some of the best in the world, Neil Magny's proven to be pretty durable. And even a fight like, Ian Gary wasn't able to finish him. And so I do think Zaleski dos Santos pulls it out, but I do think it goes the distance. Then we have Karol Hossa taking on Nora Cornell. And Hossa has gone like win-loss, win-loss, win-loss in each of her last 8 fights. She is coming off a unanimous decision loss to Ailin Perez. So if the pattern continues, this would be a win here. In her last 7 fights, 6 of the last 7 winners have won the takedown battle. And once again, I'm going to talk about the margins. I think at 135 in this women's weight class, you're not going to have a ton of, elite high-level athletes. And so landing one singular takedown can swing an entire round, where if you're going shot for shot, no one's landing anything huge, you rack up a minute or two of control time, even with minimal damage, that could be the difference. And that is what we've seen with these Karol Hossa fights. There are certain matchups where she lands a takedown. I want to say it was the Pani Kianzad fight where she has a takedown and it just banks an entire round. You need 2 of them, and she just stamped one of them with one singular takedown. Could also happen the other way where she gets taken down, she loses a round, now you have to win 2, potentially all on the feet, or you get taken down in 2 different rounds like we saw against Ailin Perez, and you just lose the fight by decision. For Cornell here, she is 3-1 in the UFC. She's actually finished 2 fights, so shout out to her for that. She's fairly well-rounded, but I'd say she's more reliable as a striker. There was a matchup where she was outmatched. That was her one loss on the feet against Cavalcanti. She tried to go to the wrestling, went 1 for 9 on takedowns, just didn't really have any success. The big concern I have here with Cornell is the takedown defense. She's only stuffing 50% of the shots. And like I talked about, that 1 or 2 takedowns can be the difference in this matchup. And so even if Cornell's kind of, a little bit more dangerous on the feet, maybe outpointing Karol Hossa, I think Hossa's going to have enough success in the grappling where she's going to be able to win this. So I am going to go with Karol Hossa by decision. Then we have potential fight of the night here. Definitely should be the favorite. Esteban Ribovics taking on Elvis Brenner. For Ribovics here, he actually won 5 of his first 6 fights by submission. Kind of shocking because he's shown pretty much 0 interest in grappling in the UFC. He's coming off of back-to-back fight of the night split decisions against Daniel Zellhuber and Nasrat Haqparast. He won the one against Zellhuber, lost the one against Nasrat. He's going to go out there and he's going to push a high pace. He's going to put together crazy volume, averages 8.1 significant strikes per minute, and he has landed over 145 significant strikes in back-to-back 3-round matchups. He's very durable. His only 2 losses are by decision. He's been knocked down 1 time in the UFC, and that was against Zellhuber, where he ended up coming back and then hurting Zellhuber badly in the 3rd round. So overall, very solid fighter, kind of making that climb in the fringe top 15 range. With a win over Nasrat, he probably would have gotten a shot at the top 15. For Elvis Brenner here, I think either the UFC or his manager just absolutely hates him because he has fought some insanely tough competition very early on in his UFC career. He's had like one matchup against, I can't remember the guy's name. It's something with a Z, or maybe a K, like Kertrusky or something. But he's had like one fight against someone that's not legit and viewed as like a pretty solid prospect, at least at the time. So now he's fighting Ribovics. He's also fought Joel Alvarez, Miktabek Oralbai, Guram Kutaladze, Zubaira Tuhugov, like really, really strong strength of schedule. And he does have a 3-2 UFC record, so he has fared decently well, but he's also suffered back-to-back losses and has taken some real damage in those last couple of fights. 11 of his 16 wins are by submission, but at the UFC, he's really kind of struggled to get his grappling going, only a 23% takedown accuracy. He actually went 0 for 5 on takedowns against Joel Alvarez, and before that, before Alvarez had fought against Brenner here, Alvarez had defended only 1 of the 8 shots that, were attempted on him. Like, he was known for literally just not defending. He would just attack a submission every single time. I think he defended 1 against Mark Diakase in the fight before he took on Brenner, and then all of a sudden the takedown defense is holding up, and Brenner goes 0 for 5 against him. I'm expecting a back-and-forth war. I do think it's going to be competitive. Both guys are fairly hittable on the feet. I just think there's a real difference in the power and, more importantly, the durability of Ribovics, where I think he can get into these wars, and I'm not worried about the chin. I'm not worried about him, getting hurt and potentially finished. I am a little bit more concerned about that with Elvis Brenner, especially after his last couple of fights. So I think Ribovics gets this done. I think it's going to be close, while it's going, but I'm going to go with Ribovics round 3 knockout. I think he gets it done later. Like I talked about with the Zellhuber fight, he does carry that power late into these matchups. And I believe this is the co-main at this point. We have Chris Duncan taking on Mateusz Rambeski. This is a really fun matchup here. Chris Duncan has just really outperformed my expectations for him. When you look at his run on the Contender Series, he went 1-1. He got knocked out in the first fight against Slava Claus. And then the second fight, he got hurt, I think within a minute of that fight against, it was Charlie something. I believe the other guy's in the UFC, Charlie Campbell. Yeah, he's in the UFC right now. And so he got hurt badly in that second matchup. And it's if he loses that fight, he might just be done, right? He might not get another shot. He ends up having a crazy comeback win, lands a huge shot, gets the knockout win of his own within the first couple of minutes. And so when he's coming into the UFC, my expectations weren't super high, but he has gone 4-1 in the promotion. He's coming off of back-to-back submission wins, and his chin has held up, right? That was a real concern. He has not been dropped so far in the UFC after getting hurt on back-to-back Contender Series appearances. He mixes things up really well, averages 4.1 takedowns per 15 minutes, but 7 of his 13 wins are by knockout. This is, though, a pretty big step up in competition here. Rambeski is a legitimate challenge here, someone who I do think is in that fringe top 15 area, and he is just super dangerous pretty much all over the place, on the feet. Also a very capable grappler. He has a 20-2 pro record, 9 wins by knockout, 7 by submission. He is also 4-1 in the UFC with 2 finishes. He's coming off of a fight of the night war against Miktabek Oralbai. His takedown defense has been tested in back-to-back matchups. He's been taken down 5 times against Oralbai and Diego Ferreira combined, but those are both very, very solid grapplers. And so in this matchup, I kind of just feel like Rambeski's better everywhere. I'm not saying there's a massive edge, and I'm not saying there's no chance Duncan can win. He does hit decently hard. Rambeski is somewhat hittable on the feet, and you can potentially hurt him, but I do think on the feet, Rambeski is a little bit more dangerous. I also trust his durability more. And then in the grappling department, Rambeski is just so physically imposing. He's also just fought the better strength of schedule. I'm more confident in what I'm going to get out of him in these super close, super competitive fights like we saw in his most recent one against Oralbai. So I am going to pick Rambeski here. I'll go round 2 knockout. If Duncan pulls out the win here, he should probably get a shot at the top 15, and it would be extremely impressive. And then we have arrived at the main event. Flyweights here, Amir Albazi taking on Tatsuro Taira. Both of these guys are coming off of main event losses. For Albazi, it was against Brandon Moreno. For Taira, it was against Brandon Royval. Both of these guys are primarily grapplers. I kind of just feel like Taira is the better grappler in this matchup. Albazi has a 5-1 UFC record, 2 submission wins, 1 by knockout, showed some power against Costa in that fight, but his takedown defense is down at 32%, and he doesn't really defend takedowns all that well himself. 50% takedown defense, which is concerning against Tatsuro Taira here. You look at the Kai Kara France fight, I did not think he won that fight. I thought that should have gone to Kai Kara-France, but it was like striker versus grappler. Can Kai avoid the takedowns of Amir Albazi? Albazi went 1 for 9 on takedowns. Kai Kara-France, who didn't really have a ton of interest in grappling, went 2 for 2, like 100% takedown rate against Amir Albazi here. And then Brandon Moreno, his path to victory there was going to be get the grappling going, land some takedowns, get some control time. He had 9 total seconds of control time. So Moreno pretty much just like shut him out in that fight. I do think he'll have the edge in the power department. Like, I do think that's pretty noticeable. He's not, a soft hitter or anything. The knockout against Costa was very solid, but I'm not sure how much of a role that's going to play in this fight. For Tatsuro Taira, still only 25 years old, had a pretty competitive fight with Brandon Royval. Like, that fight was up in the air in round 5, just came up a little bit short. He is a very, very good grappler, 44% takedown accuracy, doesn't have crazy volume numbers, like he averages under 3 takedowns per 15 minutes, but it's because his control time is so great that if he gets you down, like, good luck getting back up, and he can just bank full rounds control time. I want to say he had upwards of 12 minutes against Brandon Royval in some of his 3-round fights. He's like 8, 9, 10 plus minutes just taking over full rounds with his grappling. And then he has also been able to finish fights. 4 of his 6 UFC wins are by finish. Now, on the feet, he is still pretty raw. He's hittable, but he's also shown some solid durability where he can take some shots. He is not going to, wilt in these matchups. Brandon Royval landed a decent amount of strikes on him, and he was still in there trying to win in round 5 in a very competitive fight. And so if both these guys are going to try to grapple, I just have way more confidence in Tatsuro Taira's grappling, and I also don't trust the takedown defense of Amir Albazi. And if he's getting taken down, I don't think he's going to create these like huge moments on the feet that are going to swing rounds. So I will go with Tatsuro Taira. Don't know if he gets a finish. Amir Albazi, don't think he's been finished in his career. I'm going to pick Tatsuro Taira by decision. Could he find a submission win? Sure, but I'll say it goes all 25 minutes and he gets a decision win. So that is going to wrap it up for my full card predictions. As you can probably see, not the most stacked card in the world. Hopefully it comes together, is entertaining, but let me know your thoughts down below. If you stayed all the way until the end, thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you all for stopping by, and I'll see you in the next one.